All right. Buenos dias. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. So I was going to tell you a little bit about medical tourism and some of the research that we've currently conducting at my academic research center. But I wanted to start off with a little bit of a story, and also I promised Amelia that I would try to get us done in time for lunch too. So I'm gonna try to go quickly, which is difficult for me because I'm a professor. I'm used to talking a long time. So when I go around the world and talk to many different facilities and doctors and countries about medical tourism, oftentimes I have to use a story to kind of bring to light the environment that medical tourism exists in globally. So this is one of the stories I like to use. So once there was a very old man who wanted to have a lot of money so he could be able to take care of his family and take care of his grandkids. And so he prayed to God and said, "God, can you please let me win the lottery tomorrow?" He woke up the next day, looked in the newspaper. He didn't win the lottery. And he was a little perturbed, and he thought maybe God didn't hear his prayers. And so he decided to pray a little harder and said, "God, please let me win the lottery tomorrow. That would be very helpful. It would be great. I can take care of my family, and everybody will be much happier." And so he woke up the next day, and still he hadn't won the lottery. So this time he's a little angry, and he's saying, "God, are you not listening to me? I didn't win the lottery. This is something that I'm really wanting. I really wish that I could win the lottery." And suddenly a loud booming voice comes from above and says, "Hello, help me out a little bit. Go buy a lottery ticket." So what we find oftentimes in medical tourism is that people expect the medical tourist to just fall from the sky. They expect that God to will the tourist to come to them, and that's not usually how it works. So we're going to talk a little bit about medical tourism and some of the specific empirical research that is out there that will help to give you some idea about where Dominican Republic is in terms of medical tourism growth, both before the pandemic and post-pandemic. And then also we're going to talk a little bit about some possible strategies to improve both facilities and the Dominican Republic, the country as a whole, its opportunities to get more medical tourists in the very near future. So I'm going to cover these areas. First of all, my academic research center has been around for about a decade. I have a background both as an executive with the largest hospital corporation in the world, and also as a consultant, and now for almost 20 some years a academic teaching in business and healthcare. So we're a nonprofit organization. We're associated with a Catholic university that dates back to the 1800s in San Antonio, Texas. The scholars and myself and the graduate students that work in there, we're focused on the truth. We're focused on the empiricism, the data, the information. So we're very rarely going to tell you something that isn't backed up by data and information. So not words, but data. So myself, if you haven't heard or seen me a bunch, I'm in the media, for example. I've been featured most recently in the New York Times, CNBC. I've done work with the UN, white paper on medical tourism. Also been featured in a variety of other publications around the world. Worked with the governments of Korea, Malaysia, Turkey, Mexico, Colombia, Guatemala, a variety of countries around the world in order to help increase the amount of medical tourists that they see. I'm also a professor of management strategy with the H.E.B. School of Business at my university. All right, so medical tourism itself is an interesting mixture that has the modern equivalent of it has come about because of, quite frankly, the technology that has allowed for more globalization, which has then affected healthcare, like it has every other industry. Every industry in the world, pretty much except for healthcare, was fairly global to begin with, but it's just healthcare is late to the game. And it's been increasing, of course, this consumerization, this patient consumerization has been increasing, particularly over the last 10 years or so. One of the things that we want to get into is some of the basic facts in medical tourism that sometimes people forget. which is, it is very old. Again, the Romans traveled into what's known as Switzerland and Turkey now for balneotherapy or medical or wellness tourism. When I was in Cairo, one of the temples in Egypt had a formulary up on the wall, and people used to travel to Egypt from around the known civilizations to be able to get access to good health care. There's many different subcategories. You've heard about deaf tourism, where people travel for doctor-assisted suicide, fertility tourism, there's surrogacy tourism, there's a variety of different things, including, for example, people that travel for substances in Peru that help them with mental health, the mushrooms, the magic mushrooms there. Most of the modern medical tourism is driven by the internet, and there's some statistics that show that, for example, the majority of searches in the United States tend to be for healthcare. We're going to talk about some of those statistics very briefly. And what we see is in increasing amounts, not only in the United States, but around the world, of health consumerism. In other words, people wanting what they want, when they want it, where they want it. And those have all been established through a variety of studies. And it's very good news, I think, for healthcare, because people are finally seeing themselves as having the ability to make choices. So altogether, there's very few good numbers out there that show the total amount of medical tourism that is going on, mostly because it occurs at private facilities, and many governments don't necessarily track it. There are some governments, for example, like India, that have a medical tourism or health tourism visa, and so that allows for some additional tracking, but even then there's a lot of gray and black markets associated with medical tourism. But we know it's a billion-dollar industry, and then in the wellness industry, they estimate it as a trillion-dollar industry, although those numbers seem to be a bit inflated, but because they include a variety of spa procedures and other things that occur in hotels when people travel there. But in general, we're talking about a probably worldwide $1 trillion industry when you combine the two. So some examples I'd like to give you of this patient consumerism and what's going on in the world today is we're seeing a lot more information being shared, for example, on the internet about patient experiences. PX, as the cool kids call it, which is patient experience. This is a very important aspect of medical tourism and very important aspect of consumerism. We see a variety of health sites, rating sites that are coming up that rate both doctors and rate hospitals. And again, consumers are very involved. Information is being shared. In fact, I'm going to share some data from one of those sites with you today. You also see trends around food, beverage, nutrition, longevity, wellness, alternative procedures. All these things are coming together in a holistic medicine, and also a very important, it's on the other side, convergence you see between hotels, hospitality, wellness, and hospitals. In fact, if you look at most modern hospitals, such as you have here in the Dominican Republic, they don't look like the hospitals when I was growing up. They look more like a spa, a resort, a hotel, and that's an aspect of patient consumerism. You notice a number down at the very bottom. About 1 in 20 of all Google searches are healthcare related. In the United States, a very good research company called Pew found that approximately if you look at how many people are doing things on the internet, the number one thing that Americans do is use the internet for email. Number two reason is they use the internet for, I know many of you would think it'd be shopping or something like that, but it's social media, particularly if you're below the age of 30, you know what I'm talking about. And then the third most common thing people use the internet for, again, not what most people think, is search for health care. And just think of yourself in a situation where your mother says that she has a lump in her breast. What's one of the first things you do? You'd get your phone or on the computer, and you would look at what is going on in the area of oncology and cancer in order to understand that better. We're also seeing, again, the increase of employers taking care of their employees in terms of employee health, and then spas, med spas, super health, trying to live longer than ever before. All right, so now we're going to get into, uh-oh, I lost it, I think. Oh, wrong button. There we go. All right, so we find out that medical tourism is not for everybody. A very small percentage of the population typically travels. One of the largest populations that do travel is in Asia, where we have some data that was collected by Gallup, and then since then we've got some places where they, at least 20% of Asians travel within 14 different countries, travel within the country, and then when it comes to how many people would go outside of the country, 1 in 5 say they would, but for example, in Europe, we find only about 4% of people travel. In the United States, data from airport surveys of people traveling on international flights show only about 1% of people travel either for primary or secondary reasons for healthcare. So when people do travel, there's a variety of reasons. We have a couple different studies that look out there, but it appears that, for example, in most developed countries, access appears to be the biggest motivation why people would travel. So it's, and by the way, oftentimes you'll hear this false dichotomy, which is that the idea of quality or price. Michael Porter wrote a book from Harvard Business School, wrote a book several years back where he suggested in healthcare we need to stop having these artificial distinctions of price and quality. They're essentially, in a consumer's mind, the same thing, which is that of value. So it's a construct called value. Even wealthy people are looking for good quality, but at a price that is still a reasonable price that they would pay. And we find very poor people on the lower socioeconomic scale, they also are looking for a good price, but they're also looking for a good quality too. They don't want to get bad quality at a low price. Also, another thing just to bring up, since I'm talking about that, medical tourism around the world appears to have a very bimodal distribution, meaning that we see a large number of people on the lower socioeconomic status scale, the less affluent people tend to travel, and then we also have the wealthier, the affluent people travel more. People in the middle class, they don't travel that much. So it typically is the poor or the wealthy that are more often traveling. And again, as you see, cost savings from this study in Europe was one of the lowest reasons why people would travel. All right, so now we're going to get directly into some data and looking specifically at some data and how it affects the DRs. So this is data that's collected by the U.S. government called the Bureau of Economic Analysis. This data is very hot off the presses, was released during the pandemic. It's data that includes surveys of American businesses and Americans up until 2019. And the first data is a data statistics collected by the U.S. government, Department of Commerce, that is interested in the balance of trade. In other words, how much money is going to other countries versus coming to the United States. So what they do is they look at, for example, Dominicans that come to the U.S. for healthcare versus Americans going to the Dominican Republic for healthcare. And what you find is the Dominican Republic is in a very rare spot. Many of you don't know that it's doing very well compared to, for example, Dominicans going to the U.S. to get care. It's actually in what the Americans would consider a negative range. In other words, it's in the red, meaning that more Americans are going to the Dominican Republic than Dominicans are coming to the United States. And if you look at the countries there, you're in the group of what you would call medical tourism good countries, for example, like Costa Rica and Colombia and Mexico and India and Thailand. So this is very good news. Now, it's just in there, but this is still good news. It could be worse. You could be up there with Canada, which is overall, we tend to receive more Canadians than people actually go to Canada in general. So, all right, so the next number is now, when you look at the growth rate, this is what was concerning a little, is what we find is the average growth rate is almost 11% over this period from 2010 to 2019. The Dominican Republic has a growth rate that's only about 5%, meaning that something is not quite working the way it should. In other words, perhaps The facilities, the government, the doctors, the systems and processes are not working as well as they should. It may be that you're waiting and praying to God and waiting for the Americans to come, and they're not coming in quite the numbers that you would like, and perhaps more needs to be done. That would be my suggestion. Again, in terms of total Americans traveling abroad, the growth rate has gone up significantly for the last 9 years. And the top countries where we're seeing travel for whatever reason is places like the Philippines, Middle East. The Caribbean does show up there, but the Dominican Republic is not. So some of those, again, just because it's a high growth rate doesn't mean it's a lot. It means it could have gone from 1 to 2, right? That would be a 100% growth rate, so therefore it could be not. So to put size onto it, this is what I ended up doing, is we have the growth rate along with the size. And what we're going to find is there's this little cutoff, which I'm going to blow up for you here in just a second, which is the medical tourism countries which are most benefiting from Americans traveling. So let's look at that blow up. So what we have here is, you see the Dominican Republic is solidly in a good place. So the countries that obviously are benefiting from the United States is Mexico, which has got a huge number of Americans traveling for dental, which typically is the #1 type of travel. There's also health and wellness, and then also medical. And that's due to also a large number of Hispanics, particularly Mexicans, that live in the United States, which is one of the fastest growing demographic populations in the United States. But we also see other countries in there, that like India and Germany and Costa Rica and South Korea. But the Dominican Republic is a player here. This is actually, there's a fairly decent market, according to the BEA, which is about $22 million US, and growing at about 5%. So growing faster than Costa Rica during that period of time, but slightly smaller market. So it appears that you are in the ballpark and you're ready to play. It's just that you're not connecting on enough balls that are thrown into the strike zone. So we need to get some more hits. All right, so then I went to another source, and this was a source of a fair amount of travel to the Dominican Republic, which you're probably all familiar with, which is cosmetic surgery. There's a site called Real Self where I was able to find thousands of reports, self-reports by patients that have traveled internationally, both before and post-pandemic. This is what makes it exciting. And so I was able to collect that data and put it into a spreadsheet and be able to do some analytics on it. Now, most of you know that this is, it's on a forum, and you may have heard this term before, of a mommy makeover. And by the way, I know you're looking at me and you're going, has he had a daddy makeover? And no, I'm just naturally handsome. So I have not had a daddy makeover. But the mommy maker, so what I found is from a period of 2013 to 2018, I found 500 total, where some of them give more accurate descriptions than others. And so for the ones that did give you accurate descriptions, the Dominican Republic was leading the way. Look at this. So this is a site that's visited primarily by Americans, but there are other nationalities that also do self-report of this. These are women that talk about their experiences post-surgery. So after the surgery, they get out there and they say, this is who I went to, this is what I did. So I have all that data about what procedures were done, and in some cases how much they paid. And I was really surprised, and this was, actually I was collecting this data prior to being invited to this event, but when I found out I was coming to the Dominican Republic, I was like, terrific, I can show them this data. So cosmetic surgery, obviously there's some cosmetic surgeons that are doing very good business, and by the way, I have the names of some of those in case the IRS would like to give me a reward or something for, but anyways, I know all the cosmetic, because the women list many times the doctor, the surgeons, and they say what we did and sometimes how much they paid. Anyway, so it was pretty fantastic. This is the states or the locations that they were coming from. It could be a U.S. state or it could be a foreign location. I blew it up so it was a little bit easier to read for you. The #1 place, probably nobody's surprise, obviously a large number of Dominicans living abroad, the diaspora that happens in New York, and about 30% of the total plastic cosmetic surgeries that are occurring in the DR were occurring from New York. And then the other two locations, again, shouldn't be a surprise if you know the U.S. and know U.S. demographics. Those are the two largest states in the nation. So therefore, you would expect a large number coming from Texas and California. Another surprise in New Jersey, but again, next to New York, so perhaps not that much of a surprise. And then Georgia was, I don't know why Georgia. So a lot of Dominicans in Georgia? I didn't know that. So, all right. Anyway, so that's what, and I don't know why England got cut off. Sorry about that. I should have looked at that. Anyways, so when we looked at some of the data pre and post pandemic, what we found was that pre-pandemic about 2.9 per day, and I have post data, which I'm about to show you a little bit more about. The post pandemic, of course, everything locked down until about late 2020, early 2021, and then people started traveling again, but they started traveling primarily domestically, and I'm going to show you that data. But essentially what was happening is Americans were still traveling, but if they traveled within the state or within the states, so they would go from perhaps Texas to California. So it was very low. It started, or it went from 0 to essentially about 2 per day posting on the website. But this last month, it picked back up at 2.5. So what I started thinking is, are we seeing an increase in medical tourism travel, which would be very beneficial to the Dominican Republic, right? Yeah? Okay. So let's see what's potentially going to happen. So I use these wonderful statistics that I were able to get from the site, and I took the average number of miles that people were traveling post-pandemic. So these are the people that were traveling from Texas to California, or sometimes just staying in Texas. And it started out where most people were staying in-state, of course, by late 2020 still, pandemic, right? So most people, if they were traveling within the city, within the state, very low. And then what we saw is a gradual increase. And then so what I did is I went ahead and did a forecasting model on it. And what we're seeing here is, if you look, that sometime by October, in a best case scenario, we will be back to the average number of miles traveled for plastic surgery, which means that the normal could potentially be as early as October. Isn't that fascinating? So if you look at the darker orange, it's going to extend sometime out to 2021. So that is the more likely scenario, which it'll be early, 2022. But there is a good chance that by October and November, the Dominican Republic will be seeing more Americans. Now I'm going to go through these very quickly because I promised Amelia that we try to go through these fast. Another study that I'm working on some of the details and how to implement it is that we had analyzed over 100 different studies of successful medical tourism facilities and regions and countries, and have actual constructs and or components or attributes of those medical tourism successful cases. This is just some of the background of it. These are the 5 success factors that we find most commonly in successful medical tourism cases. And this is fairly hot off the literature. It hasn't been published yet, so it will be published here soon. But typically private-minded facilities, it's either a private facility or a private facility that acts like a private facility. In other words, they know that they're a business and they know that they have to engage in marketing and communication with their potential customers. They have to let them know that they are quality and that they are available and that they do the things that the patient wants them to do. Also, you have to have engaged practitioners. This is probably the most important critical aspect of it, which is the doctors, the practitioners, the clinicians that are involved have to be on, you ready for this, social media. They have to be interviewed. They have to be engaged. They have to be known, seen, and heard. They have to be going to conferences. They have to be known within their industry as somebody that other people go to learn from. When you have a practitioner that is engaged and involved and active and expressing that they're an expert through their actions, people tend to find them. That's how you find famous people. Is Kim Kardashian famous? Why? I don't know. I mean, she did some silly stuff, but why? But we know she's famous, right? So Khloe Kardashian. So are your practitioners famous? Are they known? Are they heard? Are we seeing from them? So, all right, and then you have to have a marketing orientation. Again, medical tourism is a little bit more than just providing quality health care. If a tree falls in the forest, but nobody saw it fall or nobody heard it fall, did it really fall? The old philosophical question. I don't want you to get into an existential crisis, but I just want you to think about the fact that if you're doing quality work but nobody knows, nobody knows. And then community involvement. There has to be a cluster, there has to be a network, everybody has to be engaged and involved in the community, meaning the airport has to know that you're having international visitors come in. The transportation services have to know that you have international visitors coming in. The hotels have to take care of patients like patients should be taken care of. The restaurants, if you wanted to get people that were Muslim, that were coming from Saudi Arabia, you'd have to have halal food available in the local community. All these things have to be in place in order to attract certain types of populations. It's very common. Places like in Houston, which has the largest medical center in the world, what they do is they have this monthly gathering called the International Patient Advisory Committee or Council, and what they do is they get everyone. The police get involved, the city gets involved, the airport gets involved, the hospitals get involved, the restaurants get involved, the hotels get involved, and they talk and they say, what are issues that are keeping our patients from being able to get the best service? And then you have to have tourism infrastructure. You have to have something for, if not the patient's family to do. Tourism infrastructure has to be readily available, which means perhaps concierge service at the hospital so that the patient and the patient's family feel like they're taken care of and somebody directs them to things that they can do while they're waiting. Again, I'm going to pass through some of these things because I promised Amelia that, and these slides will be available to you through the website and a variety of other things. So what we can potentially do in the near future is what I'm hoping to implement is we can have a scale where a facility can be rated on these various factors, and then we can then give them recommendations. Some of the most common recommendations is these things I talked about: community involvement, marketing efforts, obviously digital marketing and the website and social media. And then also what we see a lot is unfortunate efforts where a lot of money is spent, particularly by governmental entities, that is flailing, it's signaling, it's not real, it's not really intended to draw patients. It's trying to make an effort so that people can get elected again. And that is very common around the world. So you got to avoid that and actually focus on things that are really going to have an impact on tourists. And then coordination with providers, having a continuum of care both between the countries and within the country is very important. Let's pass by that. Let's go to my specific suggestions for the Dominican Republic. So obviously this gives more to New York and other places where you have apparently 2 million Dominicans abroad. I mean, what efforts are being made? I'd like to see that there's direct efforts being made. Are you having forums in the United States in New York and telling Dominicans in New York about all the wonderful procedures that they could get here that are less expensive? Is there representatives going out? Are there forums? Is there a website for them? What is being done? Are you making attempts to develop a specific packages for them? How are you engaging them to come in and spend time with friends and family and their culture and be able to get health care? There needs to be more work done on synergistic effects that come from collaborations and clusters. I like these events, but these events need to be more than once a year. These need to be monthly events, and we need to have everybody involved. And I need to see hotels here. I need to see restaurants here. I need to see tourism activities here. I need to see all those things going on. Wellness. Wellness is perhaps one of the fastest growing elements of healthcare in the world. We're talking holistic healthcare. We're talking food, diet, nutrition, exercise. We're talking things that go along with the social determinants of health, which make up about 60–80% of all health outcomes. We need to be dealing with those, and you need to be bringing those to the forefront. Dominican Republic is very close to potentially being a blue zone. This is a place that has wonderful fruits. It has the ability to reduce your stress by sitting on a beautiful beach and having the sun, basking in the sun and loving life. This increases your overall longevity and health and wellness. This needs to be a major part of the Dominican Republic's appeal to medical tourists from around the world. And then you need to continue to improve upon quality standards. Countries like Mexico, hidden the story. A lot of you don't know this. The Mexican federal government approached Joint Commission, the body that's behind JCI, and they purchased the protocols, the procedures from Joint Commission. They integrated it into all hospitals for Mexico. So Mexico essentially is using the same quality standards as the United States now for their hospitals. They've been slowly rolling it out. And what have we seen in Mexico? We've seen a continuous increase in Americans going to Mexico as the belief or the reputation of quality improves. The other thing is the government. One of the best things the government can do is get out of the way of innovation. They need to allow businesses to innovate. For example, in India, they offered tax holidays. Anytime anybody invests in healthcare in the Dominican Republic, do we all want better health? Yes. Okay, so if somebody comes in and says, I want to build a hospital, you know what the government should do? It should say, please, do it. We'll stay out of your way. We'll help, we'll facilitate, but we're not going to tax you more. We're not going to make it more difficult. We're not going to put barriers in your way. We're going to help you because you will make the population healthier, wealthier, and wiser. So tax holidays and strategies like that work. They really work. Also, retirement tourism. Last thing I'm going to leave you with, and then I'm out of time, is retirement tourism having, for example, wealthy older Americans that retire in the Dominican Republic has the greatest return on investment of any type of tourism. There is no greater investment. They come here, they live for 6 to 9 months in the Dominican Republic, they buy cars, they buy houses, they hire people, they go to restaurants, they go to movie theaters, they don't commit crimes, they're too old, they couldn't run away. They are great citizens to have here. They volunteer, they'll go teach at schools. Some of them are retired doctors and retired nurses. This is the best type of investment you can get. Currently, Mexico leads the way. As you're probably aware, there's upwards of 1 million Americans that live at least part-time in Mexico. They typically live in communities together with other Americans, and they want certain things. They want availability of English. They want availability of certain types of resources. They want access to the local healthcare resources. They are amazing, and the return on investment is just outstanding. It boggles the mind. It's better than having a manufacturing facility. You'd much rather have 1,000 wealthy older Americans living on Social Security here than you would a manufacturing facility. It leads to better total GDP and improvement in the community. And with that, I am done. So I'm like 3 minutes over what I wanted to do, but I gave Amelia back a little bit of time. So. Thank you. God bless. Thank you.